Good afternoon. My name is Marquise. This is Lizette, Cody, and Alexandra, and we're doing our presentation over nonverbal communication.
Study A is called Achieving Visibility, the Use of Nonverbal Communication and Interactions Between Patients and Pharmacists Who Do Not Share a Common Language. The study analyzes the use of nonverbal interaction, and the study was done in London with pharmacists who spoke English who used nonverbal communication with Saletti-speaking patients to test if communication could be clear. Pharmacists conducted consultations while using gestures. During these trials, levels of confusion occurred in the patients. When pharmacists included translating assistant, client understanding overall satisfaction is increased.
So study A was broken down into 8 subcategories, studies 1 through 4 focusing on direct engagement, and studies 5 through 8 focusing on extended engagement. The first study consisted of a pharmacist instructing the client on how to use an inhaler while the language barrier was present. He demonstrated how to use the inhaler by motioning with the device and using hand gestures. Because the language barrier was so present, there was limited verbal communication and he relied mostly on nonverbals. The second study demonstrates how important nonverbals are in culture. This study explained how to maintain and care for the inhaler in the form of cleaning it and maintaining it. This conversation happened between the pharmacist and client, and it was not very clear, and there was a lot of confusion. The third study was concerning consultation about painkillers. In this study, the patient used hand motions to direct and tell the pharmacist where the pain was happening in his body. And once again, there was still a large amount of communication because of the language barrier. In study 4, it involved a pharmacist motioning on his own back while verifying with the patient with steady head nods and direct eye contact.
For studies 5 through 6, it used the same patient, pharmacist, and pharmacy assistants. The patient was age 52, attending for a prescription for a new iron tablet and other repeated prescriptions, and the pharmacist was a female while the pharmacy assistant was a male. In study 5, pharmacist asks the patient if she is aware that she is taking a new medicine and how frequency and how much dosage she needs to take. The patient is not aware and is very interested about it and communicates it through the translator. The patient disagrees with the pharmacist's recommended dosage because of her past experience with the same medicine. The pharmacist disagrees with the patient but waits for the assistant to translate. In study 6, the pharmacist goes on to talk about another prescription medicine. Meanwhile, the assistant leaves the room and the pharmacist just waits for the assistant to come back. But it isn't until the patient initiates conversation and interaction by trying to ask how much dosage and frequency of the new medicine, by trying to use minimal English and gestures. The pharmacist then responds in the same short and easy English sentences along with gestures. The pharmacist waits for the assistant to return, and when he does, he states his power over the recommendation of dosage from the prior argument to show that it is the best to take the recommended dosage and frequency the pharmacist insists. In study 7, the patient verbally indicates her disagreement in her own language with the pharmacist. While the pharmacist just continues to stand there holding the tablets, places her hand on her hips indicating irritation. The assistant translates the patient's talk about why she took the medicine as much as she did, stating that it was because of the pain. The pharmacist suggests to her to go see a doctor if she is in pain and not to take the medicine because it is a strong painkiller and can cause many issues. This is when the pharmacist makes no attempt to speak to the patient anymore, but only speaks to the assistant and refers to the patient as she. In the end of the consultation, they both agree on how the medicine should be taken. In study 8, the pharmacist looks straight at the patient and refers to the medicine by showing it to her directly and directly indicating the subject of her talk. The patient agrees with her by nodding her head, and this is the only time that the pharmacist directly addresses the patient, despite there being the assistant in the room. Whereas the rest of the consultation, the pharmacist refers to the patient only as she and occasionally looks at her.
So to begin to break down the scientific components of this study, we found that there wasn't really a control group per se, because all the patients were chosen at random and they were volunteers, so there was an any specific traits they were looking for, just that language barrier to be present. There was 12 clients or patients in this study that were analyzed, and their ages ranged between 27 and 80. There was 6 pharmacists, 2 of which were men, 4 were women, and none of the pharmacists spoke Sylheti, the foreign language, although one spoke a similar language that could sometimes be translated to what was being said, but it was very choppy and unclear. Subjects were assigned at random and were not assigned due to specific traits because there really weren't any besides the language barrier. The controlled variable in this study was the location or the medical facility that this was that these examinations took place at. The results of this study show that nonverbal communication facilitates direct connections between people across linguistic divides. Along with that, all these connections work to maintain a sense of mutual involvement and sustain integration within these consultations and appointments.
We do believe the study could be replicated by using different pharmacist assistants who can translate, and patients who speak a different language. The setting is all the same for all, which includes one room, and consultations were all one-on-one. So it's very replicatable. But it can be hard to find specifically Sylheti speakers, patients who don't speak English well. So it could be possible to find another language for this study to replicate. There are always barriers in nonverbal communication interactions when people don't share the common language. For anecdotal evidence, there is a possibility of misinterpretation or misleading the video recordings of the interactions between the pharmacist assistant, and the patient. So there's possibility of not getting the entire interpretation of it. This is a peer-reviewed study that comes from the Sociology of Health and Illness from volume 36, number 5 in 2014, and in pages 756 to 771. We recommend the following to Cornerstone students and participants who are going abroad for a mission trip or international trip. The first one is, when traveling overseas, you need to acknowledge the language barrier and that information will be unclear. Second of all, there is value of nonverbal communication in circumstances in which verbal communication is possible. You can do this by using visual cues, so it's very important to know some of these cues before going abroad. And thirdly, the use of nonverbal practices around the world are very different, so it is important to study them beforehand.
Along with that, we do recommend that you are aware of the professional and leadership roles that are present in the culture that you visit, so that you can fully comprehend and you're able to connect with the people that you meet and engage with on a daily basis. Also, direct communication can be achieved at a variety of levels by exploring attempts to communicate using limited English. So it is good to really comprehend and use these nonverbal cues, because you are able to connect better with the people that you may not understand their language.
Our second study was on pupil dilation as an index of preferred mutual gaze duration. An experiment conducted in 2016 that was later published by the Royal Society of Open Science Journal tested the average range of the preferred gaze duration for people in the area, finding if and how gender, threat perception, attractiveness, age, and personality could affect the length of an individual's PGD. Subjects were given a personality test called the Big 5 10-item inventory, kind of like what we would call the Myers-Briggs test today. Next, subjects were sat in front of a monitor 57 centimeters away, and a plain white screen was put in place around both the participant and the monitor to keep out environmental distractions. Head movement was limited by having the participants place their head on a chin rest to keep them gazing directly at the monitor. From there, participants would watch a series of short videos of randomly selected actors gazing straight at them. When a gaze became uncomfortable, they would press the key button they'd been given at the beginning of the experiment to indicate the discomfort. This experiment used 498 voluntary subjects, 224 male, 274 female, representing 56 nationalities and ranging from ages 11 to 79. They controlled variables as in the actors they showed to people, the space between the screen and the person, the environmental distractions, and etc. The independent variable would be which actor they looked at which time, even though the order the actors were in was random. And the different actors did help change the preferred duration of eye contact in the individual participants. The study allows for application because the authors gave information of every software, location, and suppliers they used, as well as the detailed account of how they enacted the experiment, as well as every mathematical and scientific formula they used in making their graphs and in studying their responses. The results they received were traits like physical attractiveness, dominance, trustworthiness, threatening appearance of the actors, all significantly correlated with the length of a person's PGD, though the difference was very small. The more attractive or trustworthy an actor appeared, the longer the preferred gaze of the subject, whereas if dominance or threat perception were higher, the PGD would decrease. Older subjects and people with more open personalities would also have longer PGDs. This would only be changed in a matter of 0.5 seconds, not necessarily a significant change.
In conclusion of this study, we find that preferred gaze duration is slightly dependent on demographics, personality, or attractiveness, but more so correlates with the amount of eye contact people find comfortable, and that differentiates with everyone. Specifically, people who prefer longer durations of eye contact display faster increases in pupil size compared to those preferring shorter durations. Examples such as extroverts and introverts had little to no difference in preferred gaze durations, but showing differences in age or open personality did.
While the study doesn't cover specific cultures, it does explain that preferred gaze duration is different for every individual within one culture, let alone many. So, with our own cultures having different comfort levels with eye contact being determined by their own experiences and the home culture within they grew up, and the importance and implications that different cultures place on eye contact, it places our students on a very delicate tightrope when going into other countries on mission trips. A person with a 2-second PGD conversing with a person with a 4-second PGD will end up in a very uncomfortable and stilted conversation, as the person with 2-second PGD will seem shifty to the other, whereas the person with the 4-second PGD will seem as slightly creepy and or overly pushy and invading of the space.
This concludes our presentation, and here are our sources. Thank you for your time.